Okay, right. Welcome to the March meeting of the Scrutiny Board, Environment, Housing and Communities. This is the last planned meeting of the year, and I'll say something about that at the end. The reason I say planned meeting is if something comes on the exec board or something called in, then we would need to meet to discuss that. But unless anybody's bringing anything contentious to the next exec board meeting, then we'll be okay. So, right. And this, just to note that this meeting is being webcast, and if there is anyone listening welcome. What I'd like to do now is just invite all the board members to introduce themselves, and can also remind everyone to just wave at me if you need to speak. So I'm Councillor Barry Anderson. I represent Adelaide Wharfdale and I'm the chair.
Hi everyone, I'm Natasha, I'm the clerk to the board.
Good morning everyone, Javid Akhtar, London and Woodhouse Ward.
Good morning, Councillor Eleanor Thompson, Guiseley and Rawdon Ward.
Good morning, Al Garthwaite, Councillor for Headingley and Hyde Park Ward.
Good morning, John Tudor, Councillor for Killingbeck and Seacroft Ward.
Good morning, everyone. Councillor Annie Maloney, Beeston and Holbeck Ward.
Hello, everyone. Good morning, Councillor Asghar Khan, Councillor for Bermondsey and Richmond Hill Ward.
Morning, everybody. My name's Katie Dye. I'm Councillor for Killingbeck and Seacroft, and I'd just like to say thank you to Councillor Anderson for inviting me today, because I'm not officially a member of this board, but I do chair the Climate Emergency Advisory Committee, so that's why I'm here. Thank you.
Councillor Helen Hayden, Executive Member for Infrastructure and Climate.
Morning, James Rogers, Director of Communities, Housing and Environment.
Holly Kirk, Chief Officer for Sustainable Energy and Air Quality.
Ed Carlisle, Councillor for Hunslet and Riverside. Thank you for whoever brought the donuts.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Councillor Sandy Lay, Otley and Yeadon Ward.
Good morning, everybody. Councillor Trish Smith, I represent Pudsey Ward.
Is Becky Atherton, who is the Scrutiny Advisor. Now, yes, so in respect of the buns, if you've not already had a bun, there is a bun courtesy of Councillor Smith. It is her birthday today. Now, I am not suggesting that we now burst into, because I'm the one with the microphone and I don't think you'd want to hear me leading singing, but congratulations on another birthday and thank you for the buns. So, okay, Tash, over to you.
Thanks, Chair. So we'll just run through the agenda items. So agenda item 1, there's no appeals against refusal of inspection of documents. Agenda item 2, there's no items excluded from the press and the public. Agenda item 3, no formal late items that I'm aware of. Agenda item 4, can members declare any interest? None. Agenda item 5, apologies from Councillor Brooks and Wadsworth. Councillor Garthwaite is here to substitute. And over to you, Chair.
6 is the minutes. Everybody happy with the minutes as far back as you can remember that? Good, so they're approved. So in that case, we are now over onto item 7, the principal item today, the only item today, which I felt was appropriate to give as much time as we possibly can to this, because there's none of us who aren't affected by climate change in some description. So you've got, as I was saying in the pre-meeting, you've got zealots here, and you've got people who are still on their way to accepting climate as a problem that we've got. It's something that affects us on a daily basis. If you look at the issues in the report, housing, that affects all of us and affects our residents. The food strategy, well, we're having a good debate about food as to when it's the right time to eat a hearty breakfast and whether it's better to eat it last thing at night. So food's obviously vitally important to us, as is transport in this city as well. So with that, can I invite Holly and Councillor Dye to make introductory remarks? So I don't know who wants to make it. It makes no difference to me who makes it. I would have said Councillor Hayden, but she's just gone. I didn't want to embarrass her because she's gone across there. So I quickly changed my mind. So in that case, we'll leave it up to Councillor Hayden to make the opening remarks.
It's been a bit of a week. I'm delighted to be here today. This is a formidable report. It's incredibly impressive. And the first vote of thanks goes to Polly and her incredible team for not only putting this report together, but for doing all the work that the report actually details. I mean, you can see from the sheer size of it, just, you know, we only need to weigh it to know how much work is going on in Leeds in terms of climate. But it's that detail from scope 1, 2 and 3, as you mentioned, food, that really difficult work. This isn't just low-hanging fruit anymore. This is really getting into supply chains, into international, the way Leeds fits in the global market and how it affects and how the global market affects Leeds as well. But it's also about climate justice as well, and our energy security, making homes affordably warm, and as well as decarbonising, all those extra benefits that you get from this decarbonisation work. I'll pass on to Polly now. I also want to thank Councillor Dye. So since May has done extraordinary work with SEAC, and has been, and I believe will continue to be, a huge support for the work that I'm endeavouring to do, and Polly and the team are endeavouring to do. And it's really to have that challenge, and Councillor Dye is a challenge to us, and that's fantastic. But to know that it's that critical friend, that she's incredibly supportive of the work they're doing, and the way that she chairs the SEAC as well is outstanding. So thank you very much. I'll pass over to Polly.
Thank you. So I won't go through the report in depth because it could take a while. So I'll just give, I suppose, a few highlights in terms of the direction of travel. Really positively, we've been internationally recognised with the Carbon Disclosure Project, and the actual application that we put in for that is attached as an appendix. And one of the recommendations of the report is that going forward, we start to synchronise our exec board report with those submissions to try and minimise the sort of amount of times we're kind of producing the data, so we can really focus on delivery. We have been really successful with funding and grant funding. So I think we use the stat over sort of 3 years. We get about 100 million. We're on track to get that again this year. Lots of things that we're not allowed to talk about publicly yet, but already starting to equate up to those numbers, which is great. I think the one thing that we all have to recognise is grant funding has a role to play, but it's certainly not going to be the key part in terms of meeting net zero. And one of the big successes, I think, last year was really starting to work with the private sector, and starting to work with the Prime Minister's Business Council, starting to look at actually how do we move away from being really grant dependent. And grant has its place because there are technologies coming through that need to be proven, that aren't quite economically viable, that need to have that support. There are fuel poor homes that need support, but actually there are other things that can happen if finance is made available and if some of the policy levers are in place. And so we did a lot of work last year with people like Lloyds and Octopus Energy, starting to look at that, and some of the funding that I'm not allowed to mention will help us continue that work, which is great. And also we've been working closely with West Yorkshire Combined Authority, looking at how we put in place things like a housing hub, so that actually there are places for people who are prepared to put their own money in, who can see the business case, who want to make the houses more energy efficient. Actually, there will be routes to information. So all of that development work's happening. And for me, that's going to be a step change for us as a city. so last year we really focused, I suppose, probably more inwardly on the council in terms of energy and energy strategy. The work on that still carries on. Last year was really challenging from an energy. I have responsibility for buying energy as well. So I've had a few sleepless nights over the last 12 months. But actually, so we're still carrying on with that work. We're still pursuing the solar farm, still looking at things like the power purchase agreement. But we have to do that in the context of what's happening in the energy markets, and we need to make those decisions at sensible times. We also focused quite heavily last year for the first time on adaptation. We also brought last year, later on in the year, the adaptation report. And again, this report covers some of that further work that's gone on. We had our first ever cross-council workshop on adaptation, asking services to start to look into actually what does the climate change that's already locked in mean for you, the heat waves we experienced last week, not quite, but you know, how will we actually deal with those as services? We can't come to a grinding halt when there's a heat wave. So how do we adapt? How do we make it manageable for people? How do we make our city more livable? So all of that work is now ongoing, and this year the report focuses probably more on housing, starting to look at that net zero housing plan, and also kind of brings the work on food to a conclusion in the sense of getting to a point of a final strategy. So that then goes much more into action and delivery. So I'll stop there because then I'm happy to answer questions.
It is an extensively comprehensive report. When I was getting my normal briefing on it, there was, because of Polly having to do other things elsewhere in the world recently, she wasn't necessarily, and I couldn't believe the size of the report and the extensive nature of it when it was sent through to me the weekend. I think it was. I got a copy of it, and this is probably one of the most comprehensive reports we've probably had to this committee. That, and I say that with respect to our housing colleagues and waste colleagues, that this is a very detailed report, and that if it's not in here, then I'd be surprised, because most of the things that we're doing, because we're making inroads. There is no doubt we are making inroads. Whether we've broken through and into the hearts and minds of everybody in the city yet, I don't know if we have, to be honest. We've probably got those of us who are interested in it know about it, but those of us who aren't interested aren't quite as enthused and buying into some of the changes that are necessary. So that said, I'll get Councillor Lay to open the batting.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to pick up on one part of your outline of the report, Polly. You said you've had some sleepless nights worrying about energy. For the hundreds of people watching and for my own benefit, how does the council secure its energy? Because obviously I go to compare the market or whatever, and I go into a contract, etc. It sounds like we buy energy on a, do we? I don't know. You know, could you explain how the council gets its energy?
So yeah, there's an energy strategy. We don't enter into a contract for the year ahead. We don't have a fixed price. We have a balanced risk strategy. It's probably a scrutiny board unto itself, in all honesty, but at a high level, we buy at different points. So the reason being that if we buy 10% this week and then the energy markets really change in 3 months' time, we haven't overcommitted at any one point, so you end up with a blended price. But we buy 4 years, up to 4 years in advance. And so what that meant during last year's energy crisis, we had hedged probably about 80% by the time that hit. So although it still had a massive impact on our budgets, nowhere near as much as it had across a lot of other local authorities and other organisations. So it allowed us to weather the storm a little bit better. But there is, I'm happy to do a detailed briefing, but there's quite a lot to it, and we have a trader who advises us. So is that enough for now? Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
Mr. Garthwaite.
Thank you, Chair, and Polly, thank you for a fantastic report and very thorough report as well. I've got 2 questions. One is, how confident are we to achieve the target by 2030? And what's plan B? And then I've got follow-on questions.
So for the council's own sort of scope, my confidence levels are higher. I still couldn't say 100% because it's still dependent on individual buildings and technology, but fundamentally we are on a good trajectory, we're online. I think things like electricity, I feel confident about. Getting every single building off gas is going to definitely be more of a challenge. And also with our fleet, there are challenges because some of the fleet may not be available by 2030. So things like some of the heavy goods or some of the really sort of specialist vehicles. But I would say we will be a good chunk of the way through. For the city, I think the picture's more challenging because there are things we can't influence as heavily. So, you know, we're obviously doing things like the local plan refresh where, you know, so new development, new build will start to come through more in a more environmentally friendly way. However, we have so much established housing where I cannot force an individual to change their gas boiler if they choose not to. So that policy environment isn't there yet. Not all the incentives are there. So I think where we can, we are impacting as much as we can. Where we can influence, we're doing that. Where we can work with government to try and encourage changes in policies or different ways. And I think that's what I was describing at the beginning, that work with sort of Lloyds and things like that is trying to take control of a situation that really isn't, we don't have the levers and policies, but trying to find ways to influence and speed it up as much as we can.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. And Polly, it's lovely. I mean, it's great to read that as a council, we are the largest electric vehicle fleet that we acquired in the city of Leeds, and that's really positive. You know, we're on the track and we're going in the right direction. When you said that grants, you know, there are some deprived areas in the city of Leeds where energy efficient, those properties not suitable. Is there any funding for those properties? And I'll give you an example. I'm really grateful that the pipes, the district heating has come in Lincoln Green, the ward I represent. It's one of the most deprived wards in the city of Leeds. And when I do visit our constituents around Lincoln Green now, before it used to be cold, damp. Now it's really warm houses you walk into through district heating. It's really accessible for local people, and that's really appreciated by. And one example, I was doing I was in the area, and I spoke to one of the residents on Shakespeare. They had the external insulation. What they said to me was, we never put the heating on this winter. And that's good to hear. So they're saving a lot of money. It's, you know, so they can spend more money on food. So that's really positive. And we've got plans to insulate, you know, other parts of the buildings, at least the council. Yeah, that's it.
So the grant sort of, I suppose, environment around housing changes quite rapidly. So we have had grants available where you have criteria where you have to own your own home, but have a household income of less than, I think it was 30,000. And so obviously that is targeted at those in sort of fuel poor homes. But they still had to own their own home, and the house still had to be of a certain EPC rating. So quite often, even when we get grants, we're really limited about who we can offer them to. We obviously always target finance at areas where we know there is high levels of deprivation. I feel a bit like I'm talking sort of a bit in a sort of restricted way because we've got so many sort of funding streams we're just not allowed to talk about at the minute. But there are other funding streams that I think will come online soon. But again, they will have criteria. They will be limited to whether you meet those criteria. But there's not just grants for those in fuel poverty. We do have things like the green homes, green doctors, in terms of being able to go and do the sort of low level interventions. And one of the exciting things that we're just looking to trial at the moment, actually with our social housing, is a new device that actually has the potential to save about £360 on energy and water bills, and it's actually quite a low cost item. So it's already been trialled in other parts of the country. There's vast research on it, but we've been offered the opportunity to implement that across some of our social housing. And once we get that research back as well, then we've got the opportunity to actually kind of put that out with our sort of private sector housing, because actually it would be something that's affordable for a lot of people to invest in. You're talking a couple of £100 and having quite a big impact. So we're always looking at whatever we can do, but we are restricted, if I'm honest.
Last one. It's lovely to be here in this building. Actually, it's been heated by our district heating, so it's nice and warm as well. My final question is about the consultation and working with local schools and organisations. What work are we doing to encourage and educate our citizens in Leeds?
So we have a few standard things. So we have our standard website, Twitter account, newsletter that go out. We've also done a number of face-to-face events this year where primarily where we've been invited to sort of climate events and things. We have, when we first declared the climate emergency back in 2019, we did a lot. I think we did about 80 to 90 face-to-face events across the city. The challenge we have is resource in terms of that sort of face-to-face engagement. There is actually quite a lot of material available for schools. So we did some work in terms of sort of publicising that, pushing that out through like Leeds for Learning. We have supported, so things like the universities have all come and asked us to support various different courses. Trinity's asked us last week to help them with a 2-week work experience programme. So we try and engage as much as we can, but there is a limitation in terms of what we can do in terms of that kind of direct outreach. We have a relatively small team. They can't.
Because through SEAC, she's been working hard on this area.
Thank you. Yes, just adding to that we are doing a lot of work with partners such as third sector organisations and local climate groups to work with schools, and I think it is a massive priority for us, because young people have got the climate that they're going to face the problems for a lot longer than a lot of us sitting here. So some of the things that are happening locally are education packages. In fact, I've just been in a meeting with a group this morning looking at ways that we can get kind of quick things into schools. I mean, those of us who've spent a lot of time working in schools all know how busy it is and how difficult it is to try and get initiatives into schools where everybody's focused on the school priorities. So we're looking at kind of a lesson in a box. That's something that a group has been working on. We've also been looking at some climate competitions. And we've also been working with the Voice and Influence team, who came to a SEAC to talk to us about some of their work with young people, to look at how we can bring all those things together, but make it really easy. And when we had our youth summit, we invited members of Polly's team, and it was really successful. They had a stall and the young people could choose different climate activities, and they were signposted to the website that gives them information about things that they can do to make small changes in their lives. So that's just a snapshot, and I think a lot of the success will be working with partners, because as Polly said, the resources in the team within the council are stretched, but there's a lot of support with third sector organisations who would be happy to work locally. So does that give you a bit more information?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just to build on that, I've personally gone out to a couple of primary schools in the south and in the east of the city, in Seacroft, because the children have invited me and written to me, and I'm very happy to do that. It takes me back to my teaching days, and so I really quite enjoy it. But it's and I know that Councillor Dye would be more than happy with that as well. So and the young people are very, very engaged, and teachers are using it as part of, I actually got approached, they wrote to me as a persuasive writing exercise, so that to improve that, it was a literacy class, really. It was an English class, but building in that climate, and then it builds upon that as well. But also we're doing the food strategy. Schools were involved from the very beginning. In fact, it came from the schools to have 2 days. It came from children to have 2 days a week meat free. That wasn't imposed on them. That was the idea that came from them, and working with children. So that's really important part of our strategy is not to just consult with them, not to just educate them, but actually to involve them from the very beginning. And again, with the green jobs, working very closely with Leeds College Building, Leeds City College around their food, and they were very involved in the food strategy as well. But in terms of the skills, the trades that we're going to need in the future, working very closely with Leeds City College and College of Building, and apprenticeships, and the apprenticeship fair that we had recently as well, heavily involved in that. So in terms of children and young people, it's don't want to get soppy about this, but as Councillor Dye said, when we're pushing up daisies, as my granddad would say, they will be dealing with the effects of what's happening now.
I was at a meeting, well, I'll be honest, I was at a meeting with Hilary Bennett the weekend, and he was talking about he very rarely gets any invites from local authority schools. He gets invites from private schools to come in and talk. And he was just asking me if I got invites. And I don't know whether this is something general, but we need to find a way of getting into our schools to be able to talk to people, because it seems to be very patchy. His view was, we were talking to young people how to engage more with the political system. And he said he would love to go in and talk to the schools, but he never gets invited. And he doesn't want to be seen as trying to force a political agenda by saying your MP wants to come in and talk to you. Whereas if it was the reverse of the schools, I don't know if there's anything we can do to try and get more schools to do it. I mean, I'm not too bad in my area, but Hillary.
I know that Notre Dame absolutely love Hillary. I know that they're a sixth form college, and I'm a governor there, and that he really enjoys going in there. Maybe he's talking about primary schools, or but I know our MP Richard Bergen, and I know other MPs go into schools quite a lot, actually. Yeah, both primary and so. And I get invited at school. I mean, it was really lovely to go over to West Ardsley, because I don't often get over to that part of the city. Being an East Leeds girl myself, it's and they invited me in. So maybe us as or the governor's service could something they could put out in their newsletters, that MPs and councillors are very, very happy to go into school to talk about whatever they want to talk about. It doesn't have to be particularly political, does it? I mean, climate is a political issue, but it's not, it shouldn't be a political football, and it should be something that we're all happy to talk about. And there are other issues like that, but engaging and finding out what a councillor does as well, and how the local political system works. I've been into schools to do that. Again, in Seacroft, I think Seacroft very happily, and that was a couple of years ago when I was chair of health scrutiny. So yeah, it's I do know it goes on, and but it might be something that we could talk to our governance service about, and also lots of other governors, and talk to our schools about getting either MPs or councillors in.
Just finally, Chair, on your last comment regarding the MP Hilary Ben, he has attended quite a few schools in Birmingham, Richmond Hill, and he tweets out as well, and he's already visited Beeston and Holbeck as well. So he has visited other schools, and I'm sure he's visited a few Hunslet at schools as well. So we'll pick you up anyway. But like Councillor Hayden says, we are, as elected members, majority are on the school governing body, so we can increase through our school governing body to start inviting other MPs as well at the same time as Hilary Ben. Thank you.
First.
Yes, thank you. Just picking up on the last comment, you've talked to, well, first of all, congratulations on the report, very full. I hope I've managed to do it justice reading it. I only got it a couple of days ago. I didn't know I was substituting, and getting the A rating is really excellent. And I know how hard yourself, Polly, and other officers, and also Councillor Dye, and before her, Councillor Walshaw, for 3 years have worked to get us to this very good situation that we're in. But of course, we cannot be complacent. So thinking about what you've just been talking about, children and young people, all this is perfectly true. But it's also sometimes more of a challenge to attract adults. Although I noticed in the food survey that there was that the majority were older who responded to that. But and I understand that it's very limited in terms of resources and finances to how much can be done. But I wondered whether there are particular areas or sectors in the community that are harder to reach with the message than others, and whether that's been really looked at and segmented targeting taken place. I've got several other questions, but I'll ask them one at a time.
Okay.
So we have done some targeted messaging. So that example I gave earlier about the housing, where we had specific criteria, we use our databases to filter to work out which parts of the city are most likely to be able to fit into the criteria, and then we do targeting letters and things to make people aware of what's available to them. So I think that's an example when we've got offers that we can actually push something out to people. We do use that segmented. We don't use it, I suppose, for just general comms, but where there's something appropriate.
Thank you. Given that Leeds City Council is contracted to deliver quite a lot of adult learning for adults, has that route been used at all in order to get these messages across?
No, it hasn't. That's a quick answer, but it's something we can certainly look into.
Yes, I used to work in that sector, and there are various guidelines or regulations around what should be delivered. So I think that would be something that could be possibly looked into to good effect. Moving on to a different area, the electric charging infrastructure has certainly gone up, but I wondered what progress had been made for people who don't have charging potential at their own homes because they live in a terraced house or they're back to back or don't have off-road parking. And I know that it's said that they can go to somewhere locally, but is there any possibility of getting the charge through the lampposts and other ways so that they can actually charge from home?
So we took our electric vehicle charging strategy as part of last year's exec board report, and the kind of direction of travel was that isn't something we're going to explore, primarily because of the risk to accessibility in terms of the pavements if we start having cables and clutter, or effect on cycling and things as well. So from an active transport point of view. So we are exploring. Our lampposts also are not set most places in the right place because they're set further back, so you'd actually end up having to put an additional bit of street furniture on in order to connect through from the lamppost, so you immediately start to clutter up the environment. However, we are looking at where there are potential to do on-street charging, but it will not be for an individual householder. So it could be if you've got, for example, a parade of shops as an example, or if there was a cul-de-sac that was appropriate and it could be used by multiple people. But there's a lot of analysis going on and evaluation on those spots to make sure that they then don't have negative consequences. There is a lot more work going on. So I think WICA have just recently announced that they've got additional funding for electric vehicle charging points, and we work really closely with them to secure that funding. But the way that that's sort of moved is that it's not about here's a grant to do, however many charge points. It's about here's a grant to then to leverage in additional funding. So, you know, if you get 1.5 million, it might actually be worth 3 million because the private sector will match fund. So actually you're starting to see a much quicker growth. And I think we saw something like a doubling of electric vehicles in the city last year. So obviously as that starts to happen, then there's more attraction for the commercial market to start to come in and invest, and you'll start to see these hubs and rapid charging. And I think we, you know, as electric car manufacturers, or there's a responsibility to try and explain how electric cars work differently. So I think it is a barrier to uptake, in that people think, well, I can't charge it, but you could never fill your diesel car at home, and you accepted that. But because people assume a sort of long time to charge it, but it's about how you build it into your life, isn't it? Around if you're taking kids to an activity, or if you're going to a supermarket or something like that, it's trying to make sure that the charge points are in places that can fit in with people's lives. And then it's about communicating that, so that isn't seen as a barrier.
Yes, I think the development of really rapid charging is going to make a big difference, because if you know it's going to take about 5 hours, then it's quite off-putting. And people have said to me they don't want to leave their car at a certain place overnight because they wouldn't feel safe about it, even if it's within relatively easy walking distance. And but I know it is a matter of technology, and it's getting more streamlined all the time, so it might be just a question of waiting until that happens. Moving on to waterborne freight and the issue of freight and going on the canal network and the port at Sturton and so on, that seemed to be a wonderful thing to get so much traffic off the roads, but because the canal network hasn't been maintained for anything except for leisure purposes for a very long time, it's caused difficulties, I understand, and stoppages, having to repair things and so on. And there's also the question of the fuel that powers the boats and how environmentally appropriate that is. Are you able to give an update on all that?
I have to admit, I can't. I don't know, Councillor Hay, don't know you, sorry. On canal.
There are significant problems. The business case for an inland port didn't stack up, mainly because the freight, what do they call them? The boxes that go on big ships. That's it. They're too big to go on our canals, and to go on the river. So there was a business case for them to sail into Hull, which is an incredible port, which I don't think we fully understand the capacity and just what goes on in the Humber. Polly and I were hearing about it on Friday, weren't we? And just the sheer scale of industrialization around the Humber. But yeah, there was the idea, and then they could be put on boats all the way to Leeds on the canal, on the river and canal network. Unfortunately, we'd have to take them off at a certain point and then put them onto lorries and then put them back onto the canal or something like that. The business case did not stack up, and it's the sheer size of our Victorian canals and the river, when the rivers get more inland, and the size of the modern shipping containers, etc. But it's definitely something that we are constantly looking at, and that was a WICA project. It's definitely something, and sand and gravel are being transported in our canals into Leeds city centre at the moment. So it's definitely something that will always, especially as the flood alleviation schemes kind of make the river safer and more navigable as well. So it's something we're constantly looking at. But I've kind of done that on the spot there, but I hope that helps. No, that's fine.
No, that's really helpful, and it's good to know that it's not just being completely ruled out. I do understand the issues there. I know there's a lot that come over from Rotterdam to Immingham and then unload and go up to Selby, for example. Rice does that, and that's come all the way from the Mississippi gone all the way down and then across the Atlantic and so on. It's really good, but if we can just manage to get the last little bit from the silos of rice in Selby into Leeds without using lorries, it would be great. But I do know the problems. But thank you for that. Just going back to, I suppose, the food survey and the response to it, how did you feel about the numbers who responded to it? And you've given a certain amount of breakdown of who responded, but I have to say the numbers didn't seem incredibly high to me, but then I don't know quite how many people were actually reached with the opportunity, and that's very hard to know. And were you satisfied that that was a representative enough sample, or is there more room for other things?
I think the way the food strategy was put together in the first place was really collaborative. So I think when we came up with the vision, we had something like 80 different organisations from across the city helped us to develop that. So I think all the way through the process, we haven't sort of done it in isolation, and sort of the objectives and how all of those have been developed. There's been various working groups with things like the National Farmers Union taking part, things like the I'm going to forget, there's too many acronyms, sort of the food, I can't think of the name, James might help me here, the food poverty group, it's gone, but all the different various groups that we work with around the city have sort of played a part in it. So the consultation, we did some of that face-to-face consultation, so some of those third sector did that for us, the university and people like that. So I think I'm probably less concerned about the numbers than I would be if it was something that we'd written in isolation, than because we'd already done it in quite a collaborative way with organisations that represent different voices across the city. So I was happy with the outcome, and we sort of listened to the feedback and made amendments to it.
Yes, I do want to come in on that. When the strategy was out for consultation, we were really keen in Killenbeck and Seacroft to be able to feed into it in a meaningful way. And so we asked a number of third sector organisations who work in the ward to take part in a kind of a Seacroft food question of the week is how we framed it. And we sent that question that essentially was consulting about the strategy to a lot of different organisations to focus on throughout the week. So it was asked at the food pantry, it was asked at youth groups, it was asked at some of the craft groups across the ward. And then we brought all that back as part of the consultation. And I think it worked really well because it gave people the opportunity to feed into the strategy, but to feel that they were being included in a way that worked for them, rather than somebody presenting something to them that possibly was a little bit difficult to access. So I think that's something that allowed a large number of people, I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but certainly there was a significant number of people who were consulted as part of that in Seacroft, and it's something that we'd be really keen to do again when we're consulting on other things.
Yes, that's great. Thanks. I think that shows how much the work local councillors can really contribute to this whole process, and how much we need to do. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to echo the colleagues of others. It's an excellent report. It really is. It gives a great deal of detail, and it shows just how far we've come as a city as well in a relatively short space of time. We have a long way still to go. And we are one city in a country, in a continent, in the world. So it is a mammoth task, and education and engagement is a huge part of what we need to do. I understand Polly's point about lack of resource and being a small team, but you're not a small team. because there are hundreds of us. You know, there's 99 councillors, there are lots of other officers, there are schools, there are universities, there are colleges, you know, there are lots of people out there. And I think, you know, we need to draw on all of those resources and really try and, well, educate the children, you know, give them ideas to take home, something simple. I mean, I'm old enough to remember when nobody had a car, or very few people had a car, and we did walk. And, you know, we did eat seasonal vegetables. I mean, how many times do we go into a restaurant?
Turnips.
Turnips. But how many times do we go into a restaurant and it says, you know, served with seasonal vegetables, and they aren't seasonal vegetables at all, because they are probably green beans flown in from Kenya or something, you know. But, you know, that's kind of where I think we almost need to pick a mix, the old times to the new times in many ways. You know, we don't want to shrink the world. The world is great. The world has opened up and it's fantastic. There's lots of opportunities there for everybody. But so I don't want to shrink it in any way. But I do think we need to almost pick and mix the bits from the olden days, as we like to call them, and bring them into where we are today. You know, what we're doing with climate emergency, it crosses so many areas of the curriculum in the schools. That was an absolute great, you know, case in point where, you know, the children in an English lesson wrote to ask you to come and speak about the climate emergency. You know, that's fantastic. We've got the green jobs. You know, we're working very, very hard to retrofit our homes, and you know, one terminology you used, Polly, was homes affordably warm, and that, I think that's vital. And the work that we're doing there is fantastic. I noticed that Holbeck are moving on to phase 3 of their retrofit. And I'd like to see, or at least understand, how the rest of the city are doing, you know, in terms of, are they phase 1, are they phase 2, are they phase 3? You know, what do we actually want to get to? And I'd like to see some pressure put on our planning department, because so many times we're still seeing applications coming towards, you know, forward at plans panel, and you know that they aren't. I understand that they are working to legislation, but it's the bare bones of legislation. You know, we don't seem to be pushing them to do that bit more. And some of the larger estates that are starting will be built to the standards now, where by the time the estate is finished in 2 or 3 years' time, you know, they'll be built to the higher standard. And therefore, we immediately have a situation where somebody living in a 2 or 3 year old home is needing to retrofit. And you know, that just doesn't make commercial sense to me. And I don't think it's the right thing to do, really. But I mean, I love our district heating and the Leeds pipes and things. I think we're doing some absolutely amazing work as a city, and you know, we're to be commended. But you know, we just need to all work together. We need to have a look at what we're actually doing, that we could do probably smarter. Yeah, it's great. Thank you.
Sorry, Polly, I've just jumped in. Thank you for those comments. And in terms of planning, I have to kind of counter at that. Last autumn, we had the final consultation on the local plan update 1, which focused on the climate emergency, and it has been recognised nationally as being groundbreaking and, excuse the pun, and really quite radical, and worked with developers who have been really they have great difficulties with viability, etc., and all the competing different pressures that they have in terms of when they're developing a scheme. But they've worked really well with the planning department, and Martin Elliott and his team. It's a really, really good piece of policy making, and we're just at the scoping consultation of our local plan 2040, which will take us through to for the next, 16, 17 years of plan making in this city. So very welcome to, and it has been spread widely in terms of fitting into that consultation. And it so, and I know it's particularly in terms of going back to, I mean, when I didn't mention it, but 20-minute neighbourhoods, because I am big sister, let's face it, as of last Wednesday. But but when I was explaining to my mum why I was being, what the conspiracy theory around me being big sister, she went, well, that's how we lived in the 60s and 70s. So, and you're absolutely right, Councillor Smith, in terms of, you know, going not backwards, but taking forwards those real benefits of you know, growing up and in the 60s and 70s, and I grew up in the 70s, and I live in the ultimate 20-minute neighbourhood of Halton and Cross Gates, where I've got literally everything on my doorstep. But I know that I'm very lucky in the estates that were built in the 80s and 90s and the noughties don't have those kind of facilities that we enjoy in Leeds 15. But that's why we had Local Update 1 and addressing people paving over their front gardens, you know, all those you know, where things are, the full scope of the planning directorate. So I'm just getting a little bit upset that there's been a load of work done by the planning directorate, and I really don't want any more pressure put on them because they're doing a great job.
On that point, I don't think anybody's criticising the policy side of planning. Personally, I'm not. My criticism is development control, who don't get it. There are, if you go on to, just come along to any planning meeting. I mean, an example, I didn't attend fully the last SEAC meeting, but we had someone who came along and talked about crumb, the rubber crumb. Now, as you know, in your area, that's been very controversial. Now, from what I can understand from people who were at that SEAC meeting, got a different view than planning got. And as a result of that, I think Councillor Dye is trying to get clarity on where we are on that particular thing. And that's where there's the disconnect. Planning have got, you know, the Martin Elliots of the world have got fantastic policies, but it's development control actually putting them into realistic and pushing the envelope. An example of that is the Wetherby estate. If it wasn't for the 3 ward councillors pushing Taylor Wimpey, they wouldn't have got half the things, because development control didn't want to push too much because it was out with policy. And it just shows you what you can do if you actually push harder. I think that's what Councillor Smith's talking about. It's not the Martin Elliots of the world. It's unfortunately, it's the development control implementing Martin's policies. Martin's policies are fantastic. It's just them implementing them is where the problem lies.
Exactly right, Chair.
Yeah, and I would say that policy down to implementation is it's going to take, and there will be a bit of a time lag. We also, but that's our role as elected members, you know, is to push that envelope. We can push the envelope when you know, officers can't, because they are bound by national and our own policy, national legislation and our own policy. So that is our role as elected members, to get the best for our communities. And I was delighted a few years ago when Plans Panel sent back I can't remember which house developer it was, because it was just too dull in the old Barnbow estate in next door to me in Cross Gates. And it's and that is our role as elected members, and I think we do that really, really well in Leeds. In fact, we do really push the envelope. I'll leave it at that, and we do it well. But there are also, as has been mentioned, officers are working in a national framework, and when you have a cut off like no gas boilers in new properties by 2025, it is really frustrating, Councillor Smith, when developers are still putting in gas boilers in 2023. So in 2 years' time, those houses, so they'll last for 10 years. Why aren't developers saying, I've got this cut off in two years' time? I tell you what, we'll start doing it now. we'll start, redesigning our houses now, the ones that we're building now. And we need the support of government to really push developers to and other people building houses, because until we actually have that national legal framework, we're going to find it very hard to implement the policies that we really want to.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Hayden. I wasn't being critical of our officers at all. I think they do a marvellous job. It's the developers really. As you've just said, we do need to be pushing them.
Yeah, sorry for getting defensive.
You have every right to be defensive. You were called Big Sister last week by many of those members. 20-minute neighbourhoods are exactly what we used to have until a certain lady came into power with a certain man and said, get on your bike, and made us go and move. I live in a community that has become effectively a dormitory town. Because you cannot work, live and play in your community anymore. You have to get on or into a car or onto public transport. And we're going full circle again. And there is those on the right who are going to chuck Oxford at this council at every opportunity and say that we are somehow engineering people's right to move around the city. And that is not what 20-minute neighbourhoods are about. And we need to make sure that we say that loudly for those of us on the progressive side of this council, and not let those on the other side get away with saying such things.
Sandy for a while, I do know where it came from.
Can I just say, have a minute to that? Thank you, Councillor Lay. I am a big sister. I have 5 siblings, all younger than me. And I love being a big sister, but thank you, because I really appreciate you saying that.
Has to go soon. So do you want to ask your question?
Chair, thank you. Not sure if it's a question or just a comment, but I think we need to use this platform to air my views on this very important topic that we are discussing. I was talking to someone earlier this week who came from Scotland, and he had a Leaf electric car, which he was quite proud to own. And one thing he mentioned, not sure if it's right or wrong, Polly probably will be able to guide me. The reason he bought this car was because it was given a 5 years interest-free loan from the Scotland government, and also 1 year for charging facilities. Now that is encouraging for those people who wish to go either on electric or hybrid vehicles. It's good to see our fleets in this city increasing with regards to electric fleets. But I think, we've talked about the young primary school kids and also the secondary school children. But I personally feel the young people are well engaged with this particular issue more than we are. And I think we should be leading the way. And I've seen many people preaching about the climate changes and the rest of it. But when I see their vehicles, the car they drive, it's unbelievable. Now those people can afford to go for either a hybrid or the electric cars in this city. And I think, I personally, if I go a bit step ahead, I remember leader of the council used to have a hybrid car in this city. But now the Lord Mayor, I think, has a Volvo, which is like, I think it's a 3-litre. And I think we need is a hybrid. Okay. In that case, we are on the right direction then. So in that case, we are on the right direction then. And I take my words back with regards to the Honourable my Lord Mayor's vehicle. But on a serious note, I see many people in this city where they can't afford to buy electric or hybrid cars and they really want to. Then on the other hand, I see those people making speeches about the clean air zones and the rest of it, but on the same hand, they can't buy the hybrids and electric cars, but however, they are either driving big sort of 4x4s or the Audi A6. And I'm not looking at James at all, by the way. So, and you know, I think we need to have this sort of, we need to show the leadership in this city and say, this is what we are doing, and let's follow us. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, I've been
As the new Lord Mayor, she's going to probably go through this.
electric car user for 6 years now.
Yeah.
Yes, and it's got a lot easier. The charge network has got a lot better.
Made actually that we've, you know, there are still a lot of people who are still buying cars because the cost is just prohibitive. You know, as I keep saying, I bought a diesel because Gordon Brown told me to, and I now can't afford to get an electric vehicle of a similar size than that I've got just now, and that is a problem. It's how you do it, and it's what incentives are there. But it is a point well made.
The reason I mean, I wasn't having a go at anybody. I just want to see this city taking the lead in this country. And I was in Sheffield yesterday, where I saw refuse collection one, small one, electric, fully electric. And these are the things makes the difference. And especially those, I mean, we as a city has shown the way since 2019, and I think we need to do more to improve our environment. And then young people, as I said earlier on, they are more engaged. We have seen many of their protests in this city, but as an elders, I think we need to take more responsibility.
Councillor Thompson, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, and again, to echo the thanks for this incredible report. I actually had a conversation with somebody on the train here who was asking me about the A rating. So I was able to explain that to her, which was great. So in terms of schools, it's been good to see some applications for retrofit for some of our local schools, but quite concerned that some of those built in the last 2 or 3 years were built without solar PV, and some basics that wonder why, well, one council, one government funded, why that wasn't included from the outset. I suspect it comes down to funding as usual, but frustrating that schools 2 or 3 years old are having to be retrofit with better measures. And just to encourage others to go along to schools, I visited one local primary school who are hopefully making a submission to SEAC because they were so excited about what we're doing and they want to tell us what they're doing. And yesterday afternoon, I was grilled by 100 9 and 10-year-olds about democracy and what it means. And I think they're going to grill Stuart Andrew on Friday as well. They were more interested sometimes in which celebrities I'd met than other things. But we did talk about bins and other environmental issues, and they were really excited about it. And I think they want to do something for SEAC as well. So, yeah, there is interest, and it's just harnessing that. I probably have more questions later. But yeah, council buildings and or when we're building things, again, as with the housing, how can we do better with that? Thank you.
Yeah, so a lot of the time it does come down to the grant envelope about what you get to build a new school. We have had some successes. So we had the new school that was built on the route from the Rough into the city centre being connected to the district heating. We've got another school that's lined up to be connected to the district heating network. We've managed to try and overcome it with some schools where we had public sector decarbonisation funding. So they had their plan and then we layered on top the grant funding from that in order to make it sort of not connected to gas fundamentally. Sometimes with primary schools, when we're looking at sort of value for money around sort of things like the kilowatt peak, if you're installing on a small primary school versus a leisure centre versus a solar farm, actually, if you were going to get to sort of increase your renewable energy, the most cost effective way will always be the solar farm. It would then be bigger buildings rather than on every single rooftop. So there's some of that goes into it as well in terms of what our longer term energy strategy is. But a lot of the time it will be the grant envelope.
Thank you. Impromptuly adding an extra bit to Councillor Thompson's thing, where we've got new houses built, new housing estate built, council housing in my ward. I was asking about gas boilers, and we really are right on the tipping point, I think, because those houses were designed and agreed funding 3 to 4 years ago. So it looks silly that there's a gas boiler that somebody's just been given a set of keys to, but presumably right now, from what's going through planning now to be delivered in the coming years will be better. That's not what I wanted to talk about. Like Councillor Hayden, I intend to be very defensive on behalf of the teachers of Leeds. It was just, if I heard it correctly, about politicians not getting invited into schools. Well, you know, a bit boo-hoo, really. Over the last 3 years, our schools, and I've been into lots of schools, local authority schools, academies in my ward, they've had a complete nightmare. Teaching online, staff off with COVID, long COVID, burnout. They spend all of their time, every minute, delivering pre-planned education. And in more deprived areas, they're doing a massive amount of corporate parenting throughout the day, before school, after school. So this lesson in a box thing, that sounds really good, because they are, you know, they're up to their eyeballs in the job. They are doing climate education work. I know that. They do that in the primary where I'm a governor. And maybe climate education and adaptation needs to be more in the curriculum than it is now. But if politicians aren't being invited into schools enough, then maybe we just need to invite ourselves. Thank you. It's not a question.
Thank you. You talked about zealots at the beginning of the meeting. Maybe I'm one of the zealots, and on that basis, I do have a formidable list of questions. So some of them might be quite easy, some of them not so much. So perhaps if I ask 2 or 3 and then see how we go on. My first question was, there's much talk about hydrogen as an alternative fuel. I hear really mixed reports. I'd be interested to know if that's something we're still considering. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on the council's relationship with Climate Action Leeds. I'd be interested. I didn't know, forgive me if it's in there, I didn't see any reference to car sharing. I just think to myself, we all desperately want good kind of mass transit for the city. But I just think a short-term solution that we don't need huge amounts of investment for would be to somehow really kind of pump prime car sharing in the city, at least as a short and medium-term solution. And for R2, I'll just throw in one more for now. I suppose we've talked about planning. I'm interested to hear more about planning. So I know there are moves afoot to oblige all new developers to put edibles into edible greenery into their developments. I'm keen to hear if that's progressing or not. And then the other question was, it was particularly about 15-minute neighbourhoods. So maybe we are hamstrung by the legislation, but I'm just aware of several situations where developers have put in planning applications and said, and we'll include a shop, because obviously everyone wants a shop, and then they build the development and then lo and behold say, oh, actually we're not going to build a shop, and they get away with it. So that is kind of hampering that move towards 15-minute neighbourhoods. That's enough for now.
Okay, we might have to do a bit of a team effort on this one, I think. So if I start with hydrogen, I think we still haven't got a formal decision from government in terms of the future direction on heat. And I think that is still a bit of a challenge in terms. So I think people are leaning towards the fact that hydrogen is unlikely to be the fuel that heats homes. I think if you were to ask most people, that would be the conclusion. However, there are still properties where actually hydrogen as heat is still an option. Where there's not capacity for air source heat pumps or ground source heat pumps, so that there may still be some case, but not the whole city type approach that I think was originally talked about with things like H21. I think there's a lot more focus on hydrogen in terms of we are going to get to a position where we have waste renewable energy because we get peaks of wind, and actually using that as storage. of that energy. So it becomes, and then actually what you do with that stored hydrogen, you use it for industrial uses or potentially for the heavier transport end. And I think if you were to talk to the sort of hydrogen industry, that is more of the leaning. There has been talk, and I think it was within another scrutiny board when Northern Gas Networks came, about having a potential hydrogen town to the east of Leeds. So that is still something that is being considered and looked at. How far that is down the line isn't within our control. It's part of a funding bid to government. So hydrogen, I think, is still alive and active. I certainly think it will have a role to play, if nothing else, from a storage and making our energy sort of networks more efficient, and then looking at that use case. But I think moving more towards green hydrogen, probably less around where we originally were at in terms of things like carbon capture, although again that still may play a part, and we haven't got a definitive government policy. So just in terms of the climate action lead, so I have somebody in my team who is allocated, I think, on a 1 day a week basis with climate action leads, and tries to make sure there's that connection. So with things like the food strategy and things, there was that link back in. And obviously we've had opportunities where they've come to the SEAC committee, but I think Councillor Dye, did you want to?
Yeah, just to add to that, I mean, I think organisations like Climate Action Leeds have a really important role to play in our carbon journey. Few people have said today that it's going to take action by everybody in the city. So it's not just something that the council can do, and everybody's been really complimentary about this report and the huge steps that the council are taking to address our own emissions. But if we're going to go on a citywide carbon journey, then we need to bring people with us. And I think organisations like Climate Action Leeds have a huge part to play. My own work with Climate Action Seacroft, which is a kind of subset of Climate Action Leeds, has just shown really the importance of really hyper-local climate work. I think some of the things that we've done because we are a really local organisation. And if you kind of step that up across the city, then Climate Action Leeds' role in steering all of that is going to be crucial. We're currently looking in Seacroft at our the things that we're doing and the carbon impact that they've had, and we'll be reporting on that back to Climate Action Leeds. And you know, if that's happening at a local level, then it really adds up across the city. So I think they've got a huge role to play. In fact, I'm going to visit the new hub this afternoon and really looking forward to that.
If I can just come in on car sharing, we do have, and the council is paid, is part of it as well, the car clubs that the companies such as Enterprise run, so that people don't need to own their own car. I do know in Killenbeck and Seacroft, I keep referring to that, but where my brother lives, there's a car club, cars parking space. It's much more prevalent in the city centre because that's where the majority, you know, of the sheer numbers of people are. But it is kind of, you know, spreading out into the more outer areas such as LS14 and LS15. But finding those car parking spaces for the cars is a little bit of a problem, and that's why it needs to be integrated into planning. There isn't a policy on car sharing as such, but it's definitely something I think we could look into as a short term in along with SEAC, and have a look at. I do know when I was in the States that you know, there were certain initiatives, and I do know that in you know, you're actually, you know, kind of formalized initiatives to get people, 3 or 4 people in a car instead of one person. But we haven't got that formalization yet, but it's definitely something we could look into. I know they're more informal in terms of workplaces that do car sharing. I'm just thinking of Peter Kay at the moment, so it's like, and I did love that series. In terms of planning and the edibles, can I get back to scrutiny on that and see where we are in terms of bringing that forward, and whether, and also the kind of enforcement. And developers will always try this. They will come to pre-planning meetings. They will do pre-apps where they will say, "Oh yeah, that's great." And then when it actually gets into the detail, they'll say, "I'm afraid for viability reasons, we'll have to drop that." It's a constant battle that plans panels and plans panel chairs have to, and the members have to deal with all the time. So, but I will also ask my planning department kind of where we are on enforcing those kind of policies. And it will be made much easier when local plan update 1 is fully ratified and in policy. Thank you.
Yes, if you don't mind. Thank you very much. And by the way, I did have at the top of my notes, thank you, exclamation mark. And I forgot to say thank you again for all this really, really good work. So I'm certainly not trying to do it down. There's lots of very good work happening here. Anyway, I will continue with my list, but we're making good headway. I'd be interested to hear back. I don't want to be too specific, but I'm aware that where developers are going the extra mile and trying to do interesting, sustainable work, they may be creating more issues for themselves because they're in many cases embracing new technologies and not just building homes that they've already built a million times before. And I suppose I'm interested to know if there's how much awareness the council have of some of the issues that some of those more pioneering developers who we absolutely want to support, how much dialogue we've had around those kind of issues and how we, how much I suppose support they need. And if there are people who are, people moving into those houses that are maybe a bit perhaps struggling with some of the challenges that are emerging. But I don't want to be too specific about that issue. But if you've got any comments on that, that'd be good. Or I can talk more after the meeting. It strikes me that a bit of an elephant in the room, in that it only gets a mention once in this report, is the airport. I appreciate we don't own and control the airport as a council. Is the sound right, by the way? So I just a bit closer. Oh, come a bit closer. Okay. Great. Oh, good. Okay. Thank you. I suppose I'm conscious that the airport only gets one mention. There's obviously, as we all know, there's kind of lots of people actively wanting to kind of see its wings clipped, so to speak. And I suppose maybe we do as a council just have to say, oh yeah, we're okay with the airport. But I suppose, I mean, here we are on kind of online and visible to the millions who are watching. But I suppose I'm interested to know how we as a council, what our position is on the council, and are we happy with the airport expanding? Because if so, that will essentially undermine a lot of the really good work happening elsewhere around the city when we think about the footprint of carbon footprint of the city in general. One more for now. This is section 2 of 3. Is are people in this room have people got an eye on the plant-based treaty, international treaty? Edinburgh Council have signed up to it, and it's about councils committing to wanting to promote plant-based diets.
And I'll take the
That sounds like a good deal. So I suppose in terms of developers going the extra, I don't know about specific issues with developers, and maybe it's something we pick up offline, or I can pick up with planning to ask those questions. However, I would say that some of our lessons learned in terms of the schemes we've done is actually that resident engagement is absolutely critical. So when we're doing things like the district heating, we have resident liaison officers who work for the supplier, but obviously also the housing lead staff, who work really closely to make sure people understand the technology and the controls. And especially if they're going from something like storage heaters, where you're on a specific tariff and things like that, it's really critical that people then understand the difference and how they get the best out of it. So, you know, I can imagine there might be challenges if people don't embed new technologies correctly. In terms of the plant-based treaty, I have seen it. I don't think we've reached a view on it. When we did the food strategy, we were cautious as a council, I would say, in terms of dictating what people should eat. And we focused more on providing people with the right information, allowing people to make conscious decision, you know, rather than eating and not being aware of the impacts. So we focused more on that, and about, you know, eating, kind of following the health recommendations. So if you were to follow the health recommendations, naturally you would reduce your carbon footprint from food significantly. And that's about eating less meat but better quality meat, and obviously we've tried to push that kind of more local meat agenda as well, but we haven't gone as far as saying actually it's plant-based or nothing. So we've tried to do something that will kind of reach out to everyone, because I think there is a risk if you go down that plant-based that then you actually just lose any dialogue with a certain part of the audience as well. And I think, like we've discussed here, you want to try and be able to appeal to a wider spectrum.
Leeds Bradford Airport, right? Okay. Yeah, it's, as you've mentioned, it's and as we all know, it's a privately owned business, and they are no longer expanding as per the 2021 decision. They've reverted back to the extension to the building that they got planning permission for in 2018-19. That may mean that they can take more passengers in that planning application, because the capacity of the building will allow more passengers to go through potentially. It's deeply frustrating. It's a regional airport. We've seen Doncaster close, and that will mean that more people will get in cars to go to places like Manchester Airport, etc. So there's a carbon trade-off there. But what's deeply frustrating is that very difficult for us to have a policy about one airport when we're a very small island with a number of different airports around the country. And what we really need is government policy, not just Jet Zero, which the jury's out on whether that would ever be achievable, but on actual aviation policy in this country about where we want our airports to be, how we want them to operate, and in the wider context of carbon reduction, but also in incentivizing people to maybe not fly, or to find alternatives to fly, while we've got a situation where it's cheaper to fly than get on the train, then people are going to fly. And when we've got a creaking train network where our local, then people are going to, I mean, I saw the other day, it actually, it's much quicker and cheaper to fly, and I'm talking within the country, than to get on the train, which is just ridiculous with a country of our geography. So until we get a decent national rail service and aviation policy that actually recognises the huge harm that aviation does to our climate from a government, then we're in a very difficult position as Leeds.
Yeah, phase 3. Sorry, folks. I mean, this is my bread and butter as a Green, so just very excited to be here. Okay, so phase 3. So do we? I know there's been quite a few conversations in the last few weeks and months with SEAC and others about rubber crumb. I'd just be interested to know: are we moving towards getting some kind of position on this kind of these all-weather pictures, and whether? I think the proposal from some of the campaigners would be that there should be a pause on developments until there is more information about the environmental impact of them. There was a question raised by somebody, one of the councillors, it must have been, I think, one of the opposition councillors, I can't remember who, about new rail stations in the city, like local rail stations. And I just wondered, is that something we're giving attention to? And finally, for me, I'm interested when I look around our communities that so the big rail, not so big cycle paths are going in on the main roads, and they certainly serve a purpose. But I'm struck that because we're starting from quite a low base in the city around cycling, what I see in our communities is quite a few people starting to get on bikes, but not necessarily wanting to go all the way across the city or even out of their community, but just kind of wanting to get around their community. So almost like intra-community instead of inter-community cycling. And so as I think about how we can build up a bit of a culture of cycling in the city, I'm interested in wanting to put in perhaps more low cost, less disruptive cycling infrastructure. Like in London, they've got loads of quiet ways. And I know that they then function alongside the kind of the artery roads cycling infrastructure. I suppose, are we giving attention to the idea of putting that kind of low cost or lower cost, lower disruption kind of quiet ways or similar infrastructure kind of through communities to enable people to navigate around our communities instead of necessarily kind of thinking that people will want to cycle across the city? Thank you.
I don't know if anybody wants to add anything to those things.
Can I, on the quiet ways, we're actually, we're starting with them. In fact, in Councillor Anderson's ward, we are a quiet way, using existing footpaths too. And I'm working with elected members across the city, from Beeston and all of the places, on using existing footpaths and making them better, so that they might not become official cycleways, but people are able to use them as cycleways. And it's something I'm very, very interested in. And working at those low cost solutions of using our existing kind of footpaths that all communities have, and ginnels, as we call them in Yorkshire, isn't it? Like, people don't build over them. My childhood ginnel has been built over, but somebody's kitchen now. But in using all those existing ways of and maintaining our ginnels, and because they do provide great cycling if they're maintained properly. And so yeah, very interested in that and working on that. On the new train stations, I'd love more. I'd absolutely love more. But they're planned for Thorpe Park, and that's progressing well. White Rose is nearly finished. Obviously, that kind of replaced Cottingley, so it's not a newish one, but better for getting people to those workplaces and the shopping and the workplaces and all the economic activity around White Rose. We have had new ones at Kirkstall Forge and at Appley Bridge. And that's we're quite an outlier in the country in terms of building new railway stations. So we'll see another, and hopefully, fingers crossed, there is one planned for Leeds Bradford Airport, but not necessarily just for the airport, for the Northwest Employment Hub that is in the planning stages up there. Again, these were in levelling up bids, which, on the infrastructure, they are for the Northwest Employment Hub, and that hub itself was a levelling up bid, which we all know we were, although the feedback has come back that they're excellent bids. Nothing came up for it. So, it's very, very frustrating in terms of the funding and the way that the funding is done at the moment, or not done at the moment, and not having an overall strategy. But I know that because Councillor Khan has come to me about Marsh Lane, we would love that. That would be great, but in terms of the the way the city has developed and building a new station, they're incredibly. I remember I was sorry, I'm going off on one, but I was a new councillor and I was sitting with Alderman Wakefield, he wasn't Alderman at the time, in about Thorpe Park, and I asked the question, so how long will it be? And they went, oh, about 7 or 8 years. And I was like, really? And the amount of time, and we're still like at the consultation stage. So I have gone grey since that particular meeting back in 2016, and I think I'll be a lot greyer when it actually comes to fruition. But we really want more stations and more local stations. It's getting the funding for them, it's getting them built then, and everything that has to go into it. Just one bridge across in Crossgates, we know really well, Councillor Dye and myself, across the railway is it's grade 2 listed or grade 1 listed. Just replacing that is a headache in it itself. So it's incredibly complex, but you're working with WICA, working with Network Rail, very interested in as many new stations as we could possibly get.
To the query you raised about the rubber crumb, or is that still to come back?
That's still ongoing. In terms of the thing that we asked at SEAC, was we asked for a response. We were going to get in touch with, I think it was Sport England and DEFRA, if I remember rightly, who are currently reviewing the situation. And I know, doing some research, that there are alternatives. And I think that's certainly something that we can look into. I mean, I think it was Cork, was a possibility in terms of being able to construct a pitch that allows people to use the artificial surface, but without the environmental benefits of using the rubber crumb. So in terms of a response from SEAC, it's still ongoing, but it is something that we are working on.
Yes, if I can return to the subject of electric vehicles and electric cars, I should say that I'm not actually rolling in wealth. When I first got my car, it was a very, very good finance deal, and that was made. I got a finance deal, and there was also very good funding at the time from government and from the dealership to allow more people to start getting electric vehicles, because it wasn't very common at the time, which sadly, those good deals seem to have gone by the wayside. I had my charge point at the side of my house put in free. And of course, there was no car tax then, which there's going to be now. But on the more positive side, batteries do not deteriorate now in the way that they did back then. So the second-hand vehicles are coming onto the market as electric vehicles and being more affordable. And definitely, as someone who had old bangers for many years and really spent so much just doing them up as the engines went down, it's things don't go wrong really, apart from punctures due to the Otley runners in my ward breaking bottles all over the road. But 3 punctures in 8 months, but that could happen to anybody. And isn't really the fault of the electric vehicle. So very low running costs. But I agree, more should be done to make them more affordable. And that would mean a vastly increased uptake, not just in the second-hand market, but generally. And just a short comment on bikes. If there really were quiet ways that would be possible, I would get on my bike again, but the way some people drive absolutely terrifies me. And coming from Beeston, well, I know Ed does the same, but the thought of negotiating omnigyratory, well, you just wouldn't. It's bad enough in a car at the moment. And so the more that can be done there, the more I think people will start going onto bikes, or possibly electric bikes as well. Thank you. Thank you.
Sorry, but just to pick up on your point, I'm really looking forward to our e-bikes, the rental scheme coming online by September. So it's a company called Beryl Bikes that have got the contract. They named after Beryl Burton, born in Halton, brought up in lived in Morley. So very, very proud of Beryl. And I'm going to be really proud of the bikes. So they will be a docking system, so we won't have the problems they have in other cities of bikes being strewn and left all over. So you'll have to put it back in a docking and open it from a docking station. And I'm hoping that it will get people like me kind of used to, because it'd be very low cost, and it used to riding an electric bike, not being as scared, because I am scared of the traffic. There's no two ways about it. And I have family pressure going, no, you're not cycling because we don't want you killed, basically. So so people like me getting over that fear, experiencing electric bikes without having to buy one because they are selected, and then doing that last mile journey. And it will go out to kind of like a Meanwood, the docking stations of Meanwood, Shaftesbury Junction over in LS9 and places like that. So it's not just the city centre. So really excited about that.
Thanks, myself. Paragraph 90. What further information can you give us about that? Because I certainly wasn't aware that this scheme, because I've had a number of organisations within my ward asking for help, businesses, and also when I say private clubs, I don't mean it in that sense. I mean, as in sports clubs. How was that communicated to the outside world that this scheme existed? Because it certainly didn't come past me. So that's number one. Number two, as you know, I'm heavily involved with the Yorkshire and Humber climate change type things. What more can we do there? Because I'm taking a report to the next biodiversity one, where they've asked for some views from the council. Unfortunately, the dates that they've put on it is quite tight. So how we're going to work with them, because they seem to be coming forward with initiatives. I attended, as did Councillor Blackburn yesterday, the National Energy Action Fuel Poverty forum that they had. And this comment did not come from me or Councillor Blackburn, but there was scepticism that ground source heat pumps are actually going to be the future, that they're not going to be as big a future as a lot of people anticipated. What's your take on that? Because we have, in my ward, you've installed quite a few, and I've had no complaints about them. But there was a feeling at this forum yesterday that this will not be a solution to fuel poverty. In terms of what they were suggesting is that we should actually have a mass insulation programme instead. If there's any money becomes available, we should be putting our money into that. So what's your view on that? On the e-bike scheme, are you going to come forward to enable people like me who can't even afford an e-bike to be subsidised to get grants to actually get one? Because you wouldn't get me in a normal bike. I've not got I'm built for comfort, not for speed. And the hills in my ward make it very, very difficult. But is there going to be any scheme to incentivize people to buy e-bikes, and you might get more people on them? And then the final thing is, you partially mentioned it. A number of years ago, we were working on breaking bulk, the last mile. We were talking about trying to get HGVs to come into a contact point in the south of the city or east, or where it doesn't matter where it was coming into. The bulk would then be broken and they would then come into the city centre. The last mile, I think, was the way we were calling it. What's happened to that scheme? Is that dead in the water? Is it still being worked on? So there's a number of random questions.
So I'm going to answer them in a slightly different order. So the Yorkshire Humber Climate Commission, I am the senior officer on for West Yorkshire on the main committee. Leeds was pretty instrumental in terms of getting it off the ground. So I also have sort of individual meetings in terms of the sort of governance side of it and that programme. And obviously we're doing a lot of work with the Yorkshire and Humber Climate Commission on the adaptation programme. And again, we've helped a lot in terms of sort of setting that up. So there are links into that. And then obviously I'm cascading across the different teams and the work streams and things. And, you know, for example, that they're going to do some work around scope 3, which will be of great interest to us. So just trying to make those links in. In terms of that question, insulate versus kind of an alternative heat source. I suppose the difference is whether you're coming from a fuel or a carbon perspective. So if you are coming from a carbon perspective, then you need to have the alternative fuel source in order to get off carbon and off gas. Insulation, as a city, we have done pretty well at all the low cost insulation. So things like your loft insulation or cavity wall, we don't have many properties, and where we have got properties, it's because they've refused to have it despite all the various different schemes that have come along. So there's not this mass of uninsulated lofts across the city. So you're really then at external wall insulation or internal wall insulation, which is obviously where you're starting to get into sort of 10,000 plus in terms of installation. And then you start, if there's not grants available, that starts to become more challenging. So I think what's right and wrong are maybe one question. What's deliverable is another question. Government funding is much more focused on changing your heat source. So if you look at like the heat strategy policy, there were very, very few mentions of insulation in that. It was all about actually moving away from gas heating, and all the funding that comes out, even with the public sector decarbonisation, getting rid of the gas boiler is the primary focus of it, and then you may be able to do some things around the edges. So I think where we're at the moment, the insulation side, we would like to do more of it. We've seen the impacts on our social housing or on some of the private rented sectors. We would definitely like to see more of it because residents benefit massively. I think practically it's unlikely, unless there's a massive change in funding, that will happen. And then in terms of the mayor's scheme, I sent a sneaky IM to see from a comms point of view. There was a press release and media coverage. It's been well subscribed. I don't know that they've done much more promotion than that, but it's been well subscribed. I think it was discussed, wasn't it, in the SEAC working group specifically on comms. So I don't know if you've got more of an insight, Councillor Dye.
Yes, it was discussed at the recent SEAC working group, and I asked a similar kind of question, and I haven't got my notes from the meeting with me, but the answer came back that they were working with the Chamber of Commerce and newsletters that go out, and that there was a programme to make sure that businesses did engage, because I was kind of concerned as well that if there's a business that could really benefit from it and they don't know, then that's a loss, isn't it, for everybody? But the answer was pretty reassuring in that all the usual channels that businesses could engage with the council, it's Wyker, isn't it, that's running it, that they were using those channels.
Thing I'd say is not everybody's a member of the Chamber of Commerce for a start, and a lot of those small businesses that we're talking about, the ones that are not quite bankrupt yet but could be bankrupt if energy prices don't change, it's how they could even get a hold of something that gives them £500, for example. It might make the difference between the business staying open for a little bit longer and try and come out to the far end. But I mean, look, I'm not criticising anybody here. It's maybe something maybe we need to look at as as a council as to how we can improve communication. Councillor,
I'm happy to take that up with the Mayor's office and ask them to disseminate to all 99 members, so that they're happy to take that away. I don't have any knowledge on the breaking bulk thing, so I'll have to get back to you on that, Chair. In terms of purchasing e-bikes, then no, we don't have an incentive scheme for that. What I was talking about was the rental scheme that is coming in, and hopefully that will encourage. I know that certain workplaces do offer kind of tax incentive schemes too, but yeah, I'm in the same position that I think I'd quite like one, but I can't afford one.
I mean, I understood that the council operated a salary sacrifice scheme. I just want, that's great, is then we can build on it. That's the point I'm trying to diplomatically do without
I don't know whether because we're not classed as employees, whether we actually would fall into that scheme, but it's something that happily take away to see if there is something more we can do on and have a look at how many workplaces are offering salary sacrifice schemes, because I know they've done it for years on normal bikes, if that's the right word, but you know, just it'd be interesting to see just what's happening across the city in terms of incentivisation.
To make a special plea for me, I was just using me as an example of someone who could get fitter if I changed my lifestyle. But the point was, cycling in and around Cookridge is impossible unless you've got some propulsion to help you get up and down half the hills that are in the area. That was the point I was making. Yeah.
You obviously haven't gone up and down Selby Road Hill, and all the way up through my ward. Yeah, sorry. If I could, I'll need to go in a minute if that's all right. But can I thank the board for a really, really good meeting? And yeah, it was. And just, you know, thank everybody for everybody's interest, especially Ed. But it's yeah, it's been a really, really thorough meeting and really worthwhile, I think. So I'd just like to thank the board and yourself.
Are interested in viewing about hydrogen infrastructure providers. There was actually a scrutiny meeting in December 2022 by IIIG. So if you want to go on to the council's website and actually look up the meeting in December 2022, there was a meeting about hydrogen providers and the work that they've been doing in the Northeast. If you want, you know, for your own understanding, it was a Northern Gas Networks presentation. So, okay, right. So thank you very much, Polly, and your team, and thank you, Councillor Dye, for coming along. Now, if anybody wants to discuss the food strategy further, there is a SEAC subgroup meeting, which I happen to chair, that's why I'm promoting it, on the 6th of March at 10:30, where we're getting a presentation from, is it the co-chair? Is it it's coming along? So we're getting a whole lot of information on that. So if you are interested in participating, that's at 10:30 on the 6th of March. And that's available to all members of council. You don't have to be a member of SEAC. It's just dip in and out, because the more people we get converted to the cause, the better. I think it's probably the way that we do it. Councillor Dye.
Yeah, just to add to that, and there are 3 other working groups, and you know, we welcome involvement from all members, so please come along.
End of your statement, Becky.
This is really just for members to note. It will be published on the council website, assuming you approve it today, and is designed to complement the higher level information that goes in the annual report in summer.
To approve it. You'd approve it. Good. Okay. The next one is the work schedule. Becky.
If I could ask members to just note that the proposed dates for 23-24, subject to agreement, obviously at the AGM, have been circulated on a provisional basis to current members of the board. You'll also notice in your packs that there is a provisional work programme which captures items members have already indicated they either want to revisit or look at in the coming year. If I could just ask you at some stage for you to have a look through that and come back to me if there are other things you want us to build in for recommendation to the successor board, that would be really helpful. And finally, the work schedule also has a statement appended to it which captures your comments on reducing gambling harm. I'm just looking for formal approval, given that that was discussed at a consultative meeting, which wasn't in accordance with the Local Government Act, with it not being a physical meeting. If you're agreeable, we can then submit it on your behalf to the executive for a formal response.
Okay, this is the end of it for this year. Can I thank all of you for your participation? For those of you who were new to scrutiny, I did say at the scrutiny training that being on my scrutiny board usually does mean hard work, because we do work hard. We get a lot of good items that affect our residents on a day-to-day basis. And also I do like using working groups to get a lot of work done behind the scenes, which is good. But can I thank you for your time and effort this year? And today, yeah, we've had some statements today rather than just questions, which have been quite interesting. But again, look, that's the whole point of scrutiny, is to chair it flexibly, not necessarily close things down. If you've got it on your chest, get it out there, get it out there. You feel a lot better. But can I also, at this point, even though Councillor Garthwaite is not normally part of this work, can I wish her all the best for her mayor, and she won't forget us. If you do half as well as Councillor Can did, then you'll be doing a good job. Because, you know, it'll be a different thing for you, be a different challenge, and you'll be able to sit at the side thinking, oh, I wish they'd said that. But anyway, thank you all very much. Thank you for your time and effort. It's been much appreciated this year. And also thank you to the officers as well, because we are a team. Team, I don't know what. Yeah.
On behalf of the board, you have been a really brilliant chair as well, actually. You have given us the opportunity across different political parties. You know, I just want to say thank you as well.
Tom, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.